everyone. My name is Priyanka, and I take care of client relations at Challenging Horizons. And would like to thank you and welcome you all for joining the webinar. And before I officially have Sai begin, talking about the webinar today, I would just like to give you a quick introduction about Challenging Horizons, about why we've started these webinar series, and also a brief about Sai. So, leadership levels, which is a webinar series of 6 different topics, is basically being bought out of a multi-stage leadership development intervention, which was designed by Sai. The intervention focuses on the strategy of for creating real performance shifts in people, and it is the journey is designed solely to help develop leaders at senior and mid level to become cultural and performance catalysts. The focus during the webinar would also be creating triggers and discussions for business and HR leaders to build a great culture that enable all-round impact for a business. Now, to give you a little bit brief about Challenging Horizons, as an organization, we strongly believe that implementable training and learning increases productivity and thus transform lives. A constant focus while designing any learning or a training intervention is how we can, take this classroom training into a business environment to make the learning more sustainable. The purpose that we live by is what keeps us driving is a positive transformation in individuals and organizations to enable them in reaching their true potential. As we strongly believe again that an individual is not limited by their background or knowledge, or and that any skill can be developed at any given point of time, with the right structure in place. Why, as an organization, we have been delivering trainings, behavioral trainings for the past 10 years. We cater to clients, more than 200 clients across India, and work on the three categories, which is the senior management, mid management, and for individual contributors. We work with multiple industries such as manufacturing, IT, e-commerce, which has helped us gain a better understanding of human behavior. Having said that, also our facilitating team comes with rich business exposure and also strong domain knowledge, which helps them bring real business examples while delivering these sessions, making it relatable and implementable for the participants. In the next slide, you would see that we've been associated with clients like Amazon, JK Tires, Godrej, Vodafone, and we have also, while working with these organizations in the past 10 years, have been able to create associations with organizations like the American Institute of Business Psychology, ALDA, through whom we get our content accredited, and also, organizations like Directive Communication International, through whom, we drive our leadership interventions and carry on the e-learning platform that we have created to support all the learnings that we do for our clients. So, Sai, if you could just change the slide. So, these are some of the associations that we have. And just to give you a brief about Sai, he's one of the senior consultants. He's a senior partner at Challenging Horizons. And he comes with more than 21 years of experience in being as a personal and professional excellence. He has worked with organizations and has led roles like for learning and development, as well as strategy and service delivery for organizations like Vodafone, Sapient, Idea Cellular, and is actively, even as of now, on the advisory board members for multiple MNCs. He has, he's certified on a lot of by a lot of organizations like XLRI, and apart from that, he has also completed his executive management programs for the Cornell University and has also been certified by them for a master's program in strategic thinking and strategic HR. So, and he does a lot of one-on-one coaching, life coaching, executive coaching, and business coaching for family businesses, as well as leaders from multinational corporations as well. So, having said that, Sai, I would request you to please, give us some information and throw some light around what this webinar is all about, and we can take it from there.
Priyanka, thank you. Hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining this afternoon in the middle of a workday, taking out 3 to 4 hours taking out time at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is not always easy. Shows all of your commitment to learn, understand, grow, and also partner with professionals like myself. So here is what we're going to do. We're quickly going to jump into the context, but wanted to lay a little bit of more ground for all of you. If you've joined today's webinar, I would also encourage you to join the other 5 webinars which are there, because today's webinar is going to introduce to you some basics of what really impact and performance could mean. But as we move forward in the second webinar, we are going to talk about how group thinking impacts performance in organization. In third webinar, we are going to talk about how decision making can enable impact in an organization and what is the power of collective. In the fourth webinar, we are going to start talking about leveraging diversity and inclusion to achieve better performance in organization and impact. In the fifth webinar, we will lay the ground as a prerequisite for any performance management and how establishing the desire for impact is extremely crucial. And finally, we will end this webinar series with an effort and understanding of how to manage management, leadership, and functional development in order to achieve impact. So invitation to all of you, spread the word, join the webinar, because like Priyanka also noted, this is an excerpt from a larger leadership journey that we have designed. And enough and more thought leaders and thought works have been referenced to create the program. And on that note, stepping forward, today at hand, the agenda is talking about achieving performance unlock and real impact. What we'll do is we will spend about 20 minutes establishing the core topics and then about another 10 minutes each to understand how all of you who are attending this webinar can create conversations in organizations. So that's one very simple focus that we have done. We are trying not to be content heavy in the webinar, but a little bit more of direction and context heavy. What we will attempt to do is give you enough and more that you can possibly take back from here and work with to create conversations and a case for change in the organizations. And we will open up for about 5 to 10 minutes, whatever remains, for a few questions at the end. The chat box is open. Priyanka will keep me posted on whatever chats are coming up and any questions that come up. Priyanka, do take a note, because with the screen being shared, I'm not able to access all the chats at this point in time.
Sure.
So on that note, first, a quick thank you. In the main leadership journey that we have, and also this webinar series, we have referenced enough and more work. So to start with, a little bit of gratitude to all of these sources. My own alma mater, Cornell University. I read and reference a lot of work published by the Stanford University. Google is all of our favorite, it goes without saying, but HBR and a lot of publications that have gone in there, books like The Peter Principle, William Rothwell, who I follow a lot, Dan Pink, again, somebody I follow a lot. The Art of Strategy is something that is all-time favorite for me when it comes to organizational performance. And the work of Peter. So these are just some references, and there are so many others that over all these years that I have focused on. And all of these have contributed to the program that we have designed, and also this webinar that we are presenting to you. So on that note, I will reference back to the title here. There are some key words for us to understand: performance and impact. So let's do this. Let's start with talking about impact. Now, have you ever wondered, how is it that one careless match which is thrown around can start a forest fire, but it takes a whole matchbox to start a campfire. Ever wondered? So it's a very interesting concept. Now, if you look at the recent reports of the Amazon fire, which went on and destroyed so much of that forest, there are some very important key lessons for us to learn. Obviously, yes, a little bit more in the positive way. This was more pun intended here. But impact is an extremely crucial subject for business leaders, HR leaders, and L&D leaders to start mastering. Over the last several years, there are several organizations which have taken multiple steps to really start figuring out what does impact mean for them. We have been ourselves referencing in our leadership development journey, what does the word mean and how does one go about and try and take a look at impact in an organization. Our findings, the most impactful organizations are purposeful, and they are purposeful at the real end point. And what does that mean? The real end point for these organizations could be impacting the society, like some of the organizations which are in the space of environmental preservation. Or the real purpose could be to make sure that they shift the way social media works. And we have a few names that we have known in the recent times. Similarly, it could be impacting lifestyle, or it could be impacting the way business is done. Some of us who are in the space of fitness would have seen that in the recent times an organization like Cult Fit has come up, and they have really brought the fitness industry right to our fingertips. And that's the real end point. You have complete control on what you do, what you eat, and who do you get coached with, including offline sessions for those who are exceptionally busy. And that's the first belief that we at Challenging Horizons have when we work with leaders and business leaders to create leadership development journeys. Purpose. Let's take a look at something interesting that we stumbled upon on HBR. We were referencing some studies, and there was a particular study called Does Your Company Have What It Takes to Go Global by Douglas Cockburn. This was April of 2016 when the study got published, and it was very, very interesting to see that firms which were likely or which had won globally the challenge of spreading across countries and geographies had 7 characteristics which were very clear, as against the organizations which did not succeed. So the blue color graphs that you see here are all the winning organizations, and the gray color are what were the losing organizations. And almost all the winning organizations established, believed, and exercised a certain amount of power. Let's take a look at the one right in the middle of the page, which is called latitude. Almost 71% of the organizations which went global and succeeded reported that they adapted their marketing policies and practices to the opportunity that was presented. Now, you would have heard digitalization, digital business transformation, and several other such terms which are continuously getting used. In a recent survey, McKinsey reported that almost 75% to 85% of digital transformation work was getting either resistance or it was failing miserably. We went deeper into the research and understood that what is said here as latitude of adaptation was never practiced by these organizations which were failing. A very basic thing that they did not do was they did not adapt their purpose. And what was the purpose in these cases? The values that the organization was supposed to practice. And because they had not changed their values from the archaic brick and mortar times to the digital age values, they were not able to carry through the change or the heavily invested in digital business transformation that they were trying to attempt. A simple example. We would love to go through all of these parameters, but yes, in several exercises during our leadership development, we look at these and the reflection of these. But for the sake of brevity at this point in time, we will move on. But what we just established for you was that purpose is very important to create impact, and purpose at the real endpoint. In our research, the second thing that we found was impact also has to be designed. It cannot be assumed. It cannot just be created randomly in a corner room or over a couple of meetings, or maybe even an offsite, which a lot of organizations attempt to do. Impact has to be designed to given conditions, very, very detailed analysis, and very, very specific to that extent. An example of this, in the recent times, Fundera constructed a study of the 30 most influential companies on the social media space. If you look at almost all the names, the who's who of who are doing exceptionally well in the business space today are presented here. But you know what is the important link between all of these? Keep wondering till you look back at this slide. Each one of these organizations designed the conditions in such a way that they dominated the market. And they designed the conditions in such a way that they dominated the social space. They've been creating followers, they've been creating opinions, they've been creating ideas, and they've been creating a whole host of conversations out there for the organization to work with. And that's a critical aspect of what purpose is and how purpose can get created. It has to be designed. The third thing that we referenced in our journey of impact was that it has to be intended and a very specific outcome. So not only does impact need to be purposeful, not only does it need to be designed, but it has to be impactful and designed at a level of intention and specific outcome, so that one and all who are involved in a journey of an organization can take enough and more out of the impact that gets created. Are these brands that all of you have experienced in the recent times? Highly likely. Amazon created a certain kind of purpose, a certain kind of design, and a certain kind of specific impact. So did Uber, so did Airbnb, and so is Salesforce doing what it is doing in the space. Some other names that come to our minds, and when we reference our people like the Zoho team, which is doing what it is doing, and anyone and everyone who's involved in digitalization of banking these days. And each of you would have had enough and more experience of these. All in all, impact is an extremely important subject when it comes to the effectiveness of an organization, leaders, and everything that the organization and the leaders attempt to do. And that, for you, friends, is the first part of our topic, impact. Now, here is what we will encourage you to do. Start a conversation. Start asking your employees, your teams, start doing districts within your culture, look at your business results, and start looking at what is the societal impact that all of you are bringing, to understand a bit more of what is happening out there. What's the impact that you and the organization are creating? I'll pause here to take one or two questions with respect to what has just been spoken. Any questions, please put them into the chat box. Okay. I'm not getting any, so I will move forward. So the second part of the topic that we had at hand was performance. But how is it that impact and performance are connected? So let me tell you two stories to begin with. Here is a little story from World War II and the post-World War II times. With a remarkable number of sorties that were being flown by the Allied nations, there were a whole host of aircrafts that were coming back with bullet holes all over the place. And there were also a whole lot of them which were wasted out there in the battlefield and which never came back. So one of the generals welcomed some of the best engineering minds in that space to come and take a look at the aircrafts of the Allied forces and figure out where is it that they need to armor these aircrafts to achieve a little bit more invincibility, so that crashes could be reduced, and a whole host of other accidents could be prevented, and the loss of life and equipment could be significantly reduced. All the engineers got to work and they came up with some very interesting answers. Now, here is a picture of, let's say, one of those aircrafts which had bullet holes. Now, take a minute and type into the chat box, where would you put the armor on these airplanes? One or two words. You could say wings, you could say the body, you could say the tail. Let's see what are your answers. Priyanka, I'm not sure if I'm seeing. Okay. So Yogesh says wings. Okay. Any other answers? Kiran, Vijaya. We have Shabnam, Mayuri. Okay. Kiran also says wings. Very interesting. So the engineering minds are at work. Okay. Shabnam says tail. Okay. All right. So, all of you and me, we were all taken by the dots on the picture. And yes, indeed, I also came up with similar answers when I was looking at this. But Vijaya says the body. But let's for a moment take a step back. And when we talk about impact and performance, ask ourselves this question. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to repair the plane, or are we trying to prevent the lives of the pilots from getting lost? And when we seriously ponder on that question is when we will realize that this image is of a plane that made it back. It is not of a plane that actually crashed out there in the battlefield. Funny, isn't it? So if all of us take on these answers of the body, the wing, the tail, and armor those areas of the plane, what we're going to do is repair the planes, or maybe even make it softer where it is getting short and we can see it. Most of us would not achieve the objective of actually saving the pilots, because we don't know where the planes which were shot and crashed had the maximum vulnerability. Wonder that? Yeah. And highly likely those were at the engine or in the front of the aircraft, because those are the planes that did not make back. Stunning idea, but that's exactly what being purposeful does. So an engineer from World War II who was actually purposeful and not just trying to do his job really figured out the problem, because his purpose was not repairing the plane or making them stronger. It was from making the pilots safer and preventing the planes from crashing. So that's a typical example of how we perform in organizations. We go after the symptoms that we see. Highly likely we don't get to the roots of the real problem. Okay, story number 2 for you. That's an engine of a ship. And there is this wonderful story of a ship that got docked in one of the naval yards, and almost all the mechanics and whoever they could find to repair the engines could not get the job done. Finally, somebody said that, hey, there's this old diesel mechanic who is available somewhere. I can help you out with this problem. Everybody reluctantly says, a diesel mechanic and working on a ship's engine, will that ever work? Well, they called the man. He looked around, spent about 15 minutes in the engine room, takes out his hammer and starts striking one of the pipes. And a ship which had been lying lifeless in the docks for several days. Priyanka, somebody is saying, Rakesh is saying that he cannot hear the voice. Can you just check, please? So the ship that was lying lifeless in the dock for several days now comes to life. The captain, extremely happy, turns around to the diesel mechanic and asks him how much is the bill. And he says, here, $1,000. The captain, surprised, says, you only struck with the hammer a few times and $1,000? Can you give me an itemized bill? And the mechanic turns around, makes the itemized bill and hands it over, which reads $1 for striking with the hammer, $999 for knowing where to strike. That, my friends, is another example of how the understanding of impact leads a person to change his or her behaviors. So in these two stories, there are three key words that we just experienced and which we will highlight for you. From almost all of our research, we found that autonomy, mastery, and purpose, these are three performance criteria that are extremely well linked to how an individual can do his or her job the best. And an understanding of impact can create an understanding of purpose, mastery, and autonomy that a person needs to have. And that's what, my friends, is really the real performance that we focus on. If some of you have heard the 2009, if I'm not wrong, the 2009 talk by Dan Pink on motivation on TED Talks, this is one of those subjects that he's so beautifully brought out. And even in his book, Drive, Dan Pink talks about this whole concept where if you really have to be impactful with whatever you do, if you really have to bring out real performance, you can do it by making sure that you understand purpose, understand how to achieve mastery, and understanding and creating autonomy for yourself. In almost all of our work, and now for me, it's been about 22 years of working with various corporates, repeatedly, the highest performers and the best of the talent always started with knowing why am I doing what am I doing. And that's really essentially the purpose. In our own competency development language, a lot of you would have referred to this as focusing on strategy, translating strategy into results, and competencies like business acumen, connecting the dots, etc. So being purposeful comes from a certain kind of mindset. The second element of real performance essentially is when you are able to create mastery for yourself and your teams. And this mastery is essentially a combination of several elements. And in almost all our organizations, we need to have great in-depth management knowledge, significantly good technical skills, and a whole host of behavioral and cultural capabilities that we need to have. So that leads us to the third angle, that the moment we have established purpose and mastery, we are able to act with autonomy. Go back to the story of the World War II engineer who found out where to really plate the aircraft so that it could be prevented from crashing. His purpose was really to build better airplanes. His mastery was on the subject of warplanes, and hence it gave him the autonomy to give the suggestion of where to plant the armor as against where everybody else recommended it on what they were seeing from the damaged planes which had come back. So just an example. I will again pause here because this is the point where we have connected how impact and purpose links back to real performance. If anybody has any questions, you can put it on the chat box before we start tying this up for you of how do you really start creating conversations in the organizations around this. Any questions that any one of you has? Okay, I have my eyes on the chat window if any of you post there. So an example of how lack of purpose, lack of mastery, and lack of autonomy can create challenges for you. This was a study which was published in the June of 2017 in HBR. And it was a study about new leaders who were coming onto these senior positions in the organization. What came out was that there were a whole host of reasons where leaders were getting misaligned with the organization. Look at factors number 1 and 2. Poor grasp of how organization works and a misfit with the organization culture. When we dug deeper into this and we also started speaking to a lot of leaders, we figured out that lack of alignment on the purpose of the organization and the personal purpose of the leader was a contributing factor. The leader thought he or she could bring his or her own style to the organization and try to change it, whereas the organization had its own style and the culture that it had. Clear alignment of, misalignment of purpose between the leader and the organization. Look at factors number 3, 4, 5, and 6. All of them are about the leader's mastery of how the job was supposed to be done. Alliances, understanding of the business model, decision making, strategy, and how it needs to be. And these were all examples of how lack of mastery over their subject, over change management, over influencing an organization were really creating blocks for the new leader. And last but not the least, the skill and the experience was stopping them from having autonomy. So going back and summarizing, real impact is important in the organization, but for that real impact to happen, real performance is required. And that real performance happens only when everyone in the organization is purposeful, approaches mastery, and operates out of autonomy. So those were largely the concepts that we had to pick up in today's webinar. But if there is a need for impact, and if there is a need for real performance, which means purposeful, mastery-oriented and autonomy-oriented people in the organization, what are the enablers and disablers for these? Well, fortunately or unfortunately, the enablers and disablers are all the same. Any and every organization which we have mentioned in the case studies here, or any that you would pick up which have an iota of effectiveness, and these could be seen by various means. Go to the Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies, go to the list of inc.com published organizations which are referred by employees, go to the list of the Forbes top 1000 companies and the top 100 companies to work for. Look at all the great place to work organizations, or look at any of the organizations that Gallup, Aon, or any of these other organizations which are doing engagement surveys refer. You would consistently and repeatedly find that each of these organizations has mastered 3 levers. Number 1, a true culture that enables the purpose of the organization. Number 2, a leadership which is devoted to upholding and evolving that culture. And number 3, systems that the leaders have created for anyone and everyone in the organization to do their best. Consistently, these have come up as 3 of the best levers that any and all of us can use. For all of you as HR, talent, and business leaders, here's the invitation. What about your culture is really making people give their best every day? And ask it in a funny way. What about your culture makes your leader, makes your people give their best on a Monday morning and on a Friday evening, and every time in between the week, right? Ask about leadership. How many true leaders have you really produced? And a great example of this is any of those organizations which have sent out leaders throughout industries, be it GE, be it American Express, or be it the Toyotas of the world, where leaders are grown and shaped and they have gone to many, many organizations. And again, ask yourself, what are the systems in your organization that make the life of people easy? So here, as a summary, 3 things for us to look at. Number 1, it's important for us to understand what is the real impact that our organizations are bringing. Number 2, it's important for us to understand how real performance can be created that translates into the required impact. And number 3, it's extremely crucial for us to create the right culture, leadership, and systems that can come together and create everything that we need to do for impact and performance. But a formula on that a little later before we finish this webinar. Before we really move forward and get to the question and answers, here are 2 things that I wanted to leave with you today. An important question, And for all HR and business leaders, the question is, if you have to change, how do I go about creating conversations? Books after books, articles after articles have been written on change management. But often, very, very often, very little is said about where do we start the conversation. So here is a trick for you. Start asking, what are the dilemmas that we face in the organization? And dilemmas are about, should we do this or should we do that? Should we grow like this or grow like that? Perform like this or perform like that? Should we send resources here or send resources there? And enough and more of such dilemmas that exist. In fact, it's so beautiful, the subject of dilemmas and paradoxes, that almost all of you would be a custodian or recipient of what is called a competency dictionary in an organization. And very, very often, what do? When we are putting competencies out there, we will put something like innovation orientation and detail orientation against the same JD. Now imagine this. Innovation orientation is a divergent skill. Detail orientation is a convergent skill. What are you telling yourself and others? Should the person be divergent or convergent? It's so interesting, this subject, that if you follow neurology and all the neurological research, it'll say that highly likely a person will either have a balance or one or two of these. He or she will never be good at both of them at the same time. And that's exactly how the makeup is. Same goes for values. There are organizations which have accuracy as a value, and it also has speed as a value. Now imagine this, if you were running at 100 kilometers per hour, and if you were supposed to count every single tree or bird that you pass by at 100 kilometers per hour, would you ever be able to do it? Dilemmas again. So as change leaders and as people who want your organization and people to be impactful, here is our first invitation to you. Start figuring out the dilemmas and paradoxes in your organization and start creating conversations around these. Number two, derailers. And often there are enough and more of derailers also. If any one of you goes back and watches Dan Pink's video on the puzzle of motivation, from where AMP was born and the talk of AMP got so epitomized, he talks about several research which shows, and these are researches which were done by institutions like the Oxford, where repeatedly they have found that most pay for performance programs actually debilitate performance and not enable performance. Must be a shocking news when you hear this, but that's the truth. Go watch the video, and there will be enough and more of these researches that you also find. But that's where derailers happen, because the moment you start rewarding certain behaviors, what you're doing is you're doing more and more of those behaviors and extinguishing the other behaviors. Some of these derailers, like performance pay in your organization, is killing collaboration, because we want individual contributors to succeed. It is killing ownership, because there are very few things which people will focus on, and which is what is going to get them rewards, and they'll not focus on everything else. Ownership is, however, a total concept. Look at how ownership differs between an entrepreneur and someone who works in most of our corporates and organizations. So those are some examples for you to start conversing. Connecting the dots back for you. If you were to start conversing about dilemmas and you were to start conversing about derailers, you will start identifying and listing out the disabilities that your organization currently faces in being impactful, and your people face in producing real performance. In our experience, we have sometimes seen organizations which are practicing high-end performance management systems like balanced scorecards and OKRs also fail. The simple reason is that the purpose and the real performance definition of every single department head and every single senior or middle level person is different in that organization. It's not the same. And highly unlikely, they're not going to be able to work together. So at Challenging Horizons, when we do our leadership development journey, our constant focus is to get all the leaders to understand the fundamentals of impact and performance and get them to create a total organizational alignment. Not about a department, not about a level, but total organizational alignment. So another way that you can create conversation is various topics that keep creeping up in the organization about how do you build leaders, how do you design the organization, what kind of systems do you put in, how do you do your hiring, etc., etc. So each one of these areas presents enough and more of opportunity for you to ask two questions. If we do this, what is going to be the impact of this, the real impact of this on our customers? And second question, if we do this, will we get real performance that will impact our customers positively or help the organization achieve its objectives correctly? Often all of these conversations that we are having in organizations are based on tasks and their outcomes. That's it. We hardly ever go to what is it going to do for us as an organization, the team, the culture, the customer, and the society. We hardly ever talk about these things, hardly ever. Most of those conversations happen in AOPs. And other than AOPs, hardly ever, and pardon me for using an acronym, the annual operating plans or strategy meets that happen at those remote, beautiful locations that we once in a while indulge in. Except for those times, these questions of consideration of impact and real performance usually never come in. The real organizations which create impact talk about these things every single day. Every single decision is taken to create impact. So how is it that all of you can build change and build a case for change? And it's extremely important to not only build change, but to build a case for change first. So since we all have this huge thing for formulas, we will leave a little formula for you as a little gift from Challenging Horizons team. So first one, prepare a case for design of impact. Start talking about why impact is important and why do we need to create a design for impact. Start talking about a case for systematizing the measures. And these measures are measures of real performance. When you start doing both of these, what will happen is you and your leaders will start sowing the seeds of great strategy, because you're creating impact that is designed and a system that measures these. Next step, put together a case and start creating the change for measuring the design. Now, if you do the first two, measuring the design is the first thing that your measures should do, not measuring performance. Because performance will be only as good as the design of the organization. This is what is great execution. You should start having measures which performs a check of the whole system and not just individuals. Slowly put together an understanding of it, that if the impact that you're creating in the organization is significant enough. And last but not the least, go back and repeat this process. So if as change agents, you want to start doing something in your organization about making your organization's culture and people perform better, here are the 5 things that you need to do regularly, almost regularly. Design for impact, systematize the measures, measure the design, and make sense if the impact is significant enough, and then go back and repeat the process. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a great example of how strategy flows to execution, execution flows to reviews, and all of these are tied together by great behavior in an organization. That's essentially what we would say about creating the right kind of impact and performance in the organization. That's all, ladies and gentlemen, from today's introductory webinar. Before we invite questions, we would again say that this webinar was only about building the fundamentals of those two words, impact and performance. Please do come back and attend the rest of the webinars, because that is where we will talk about how group thinking, decision making, performance design, and several other things are actually impacting the organization. We will pause for questions at this point in time. Priyanka, people can speak also, right? If somebody is not comfortable typing, you can come online and speak also. Just unmute yourself, please. Okay, since no questions are just coming up, I have a question to ask of all of the participants. In 2 words or 3 words, can you describe the impact that your organization is trying to achieve? In 2 or 3 words, could you describe the impact that your organization is trying to achieve? Okay. Yogesh says ownership. Okay. Driving results. Okay. 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 So let's just take 2 of those which have come up. Okay. Uh, which is driving results and people taking ownership. Now, Yogesh, Vijaya, thank you so much for contributing those 2 ideas. Now, in our experience and in most of the consulting that we are doing, what we have found is that these are themes which almost 99% of the organizations are focused on: ownership and driving results. So, a question for all of us as a fraternity of business and HR leaders to ask is, if ownership and driving results is something that most organizations are going after, are we achieving it fully? Or does this keep coming up as something season after season after season? And here's my experience. It's now been about 15 years that I've been doing assessment development centers. And in almost all of those 15 years, these are 2 competencies that we have continuously measured and we have put in action plans and tried to get them up. But they refuse to go out of the inventory of developmental needs. And ask yourselves this question, almost all of you. You would have seen that in your own developmental needs and calendars, you'll be running these programs. Contrary to this, if you were to achieve real change in the organization, here is a way that you could look at it. I'm just going to flip a few slides and bring to you the words AMP: autonomy, purpose, and mastery. Try this little trick out with all the people who you want to have greater ownership. Design a workshop or work with a partner like Challenging Horizons to design a workshop for these people to figure out what is it that they want to achieve out of their life, which typically we refer to as life vision. And this will be the first step where most people will get stuck. Either they don't have a clear life vision, or most of will be about money, some of will be about jobs, etc. Very few of them will have something that impacts and is greater good. And greater good essentially refers to the larger society, environment, people at large. It could be about doing something original or genuine. Similarly, for driving results, you will find the same kind of challenges that people find. But as you do this first step of helping them design their personal vision, take them to the next step after that in the workshop, which is getting around to having the social impact that they're having in the organization. How do I impact teams? How do I impact other functions? And then ask them to talk about how their personal vision and the social vision connects to the organizational vision. And this is where you will start figuring out that a lot of people are way far away in their personal vision from their organizational vision. And which is where, in spite of the best of intention, best of training, best of work, their attention is always divided between two things: what the organization is asking them to do and what they personally are motivated to do. Wherever they are personally motivated to do, they are going to take their ownership, not to what the organization is going to ask them to do. So if you were to really create change in your organization, go back and work with this derailer of aligning people's personal visions to what the organization essentially wants to achieve. A very critical step that you should be doing, whether it's an onboarding journey or every few years for people who are in the organization. Try this out and see how this creates a difference. Because everything that I just said is the formula on this board, where we are talking about telling people to design the impact of their life. How will they measure that impact? And then measuring their whole plan and seeing if they are doing wonderfully enough over a period of time. So try this out. Hope that helps, Yogesh, Vijaya. And if you move like this for about 6 to 8 months, highly likely you will be able to get at least a control group of about 50 to 100 people in your organization out of negative ownership and negative driving results into more entrepreneurial behaviors. This suggestion is coming out of some real life work that we have done with a few organizations. Okay. I think we are almost at time, being respectful of everybody's schedule. If there is one last question that anybody wants to post, we could. Otherwise, we will call it a day and look forward to seeing all of you in about 15 days. Any questions at all, anybody? Okay, does look like. So thank you so much from all of us. Priyanka, anything that you would want to highlight before they sign off for the day?
No, I would just like to thank you and everyone who joined us, and also for the insights that you provided. Like Sai mentioned, I would just like to reiterate that we look forward to seeing you again on the second series of the webinar that we have, which would talk about enabling group thinking for impact, and that would also be a conversation about being powerful collectively. So thank you all once again, and we look forward to this intervention with you. And also spread the word. You could invite your colleagues and the people from the L&D department as well.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you soon. And the next 5 discussions are going to be way deeper and with a lot more concepts and tools. We will also be giving away some tools. So please do come back. Thank you so much.